down here. I had 2 kids early on with a different person, and then me and Cole got married in October of 2020 with the hopes that we would have a child or 2 to be able to raise together. So during my pregnancy, I was older, I was 36, so the term geriatric uterus gets brought up. Anybody else has had a child at the age of 35, but her uterus is geriatric at that point, which I did not know, which is fun. So you have to go to the high-risk doctor, the perinatalogist as well. So I was seeing my OB and the perinatalogist during that time of my pregnancy. There it is. And so got pregnant pretty quickly. My due date was July 31st of 21. Towards the second half of my pregnancy, when they did certain ultrasounds and scans, the perinatalogist had discussed with me that I had a low-lying placenta. Typically, they weren't really too worried about it because as the baby grows, the placenta will kind of go with it and grow up out of the way. Mine did not really move a whole lot. At the time of my delivery, it was, let me check my notes, I want to say like 2 centimeters away from the cervix. So not a whole lot of room for between the cervix and the placenta for the baby to pass naturally. But my OB did not seem concerned about it at that point. She thought we could still have a natural birth. Since I had found out about the low-lying placenta, I had this gut feeling, and my family, my friends can attest to this, that I was very worried about, I had the strong feeling, strong intuition, that while giving birth, the baby would tear the placenta on the way out and I would bleed out and die. And now that I look back on it, I think that was God kind of like putting something in my head, like a warning, like something is coming, something, prepare for this kind of thing. And so a lot of the decisions that me and Cole have made during the pregnancy and events around that time while I was still pregnant kind of went off of how I felt at that time about it. We had toured both hospitals because I had both of my older kids at Pekin Hospital. My past OB was no longer practicing in the area, and so we had to find a new OB, a new hospital, and I had heard good things about both hospitals, so we did tours of both, which typically I feel like that's not something that I personally would do. I think that was set into my heart to be able to go look and to make a decision off of that. I felt at the time that Methodist Hospital was a little bit less sterile feeling, and so that's why we went with Methodist Hospital. Towards the end, early July, and Mom, I'm not sure on the dates, when was that reunion in Iowa that we were?
Last week of June.
The last week of June, and you guys were to be driving home on the 4th, correct? Okay. So the last week in June of 21, so I was about 8 months, around 35 weeks at that point. We had planned on going on this vacation. It was my whole immediate family with husbands, wives, and kids. So my older sisters, younger brother, their families as well. And we had planned on going, but in the back of my mind, and Cole can attest to this, that I was worried because it was, 10 hours away? 10 hours away, that it was so close to my due date, being a month away, that something was going to happen and I wasn't going to be at home. I wasn't going to be able to make it back home to give birth at my hospital that we chose with my doctor. And then at the time also my blood pressures had been kind of intermittently high at days, high at times. I had major swelling, and I'm kind of upset I didn't print off pictures of those, but I was very, very swollen. I retained a lot of water. I gained a lot of weight, mostly water weight and swelling during my pregnancy. And so the high blood pressure, the swelling, made me worried about preeclampsia as well. So we have the low-lying placenta, and then we also have the swelling, the high blood pressures. We decided last minute, I think the week before, that we would not go on this trip due to the blood pressures and my worry about not being close to home. Again, I think that was a God thing. He was in my mind, in my brain, kind of nudging like, hey, you need to stay close to home. Something is going to happen. So I had been monitoring my blood pressures. I had actually gone into triage at the hospital 3 separate times due to my blood pressure and swelling the first 2 times. Obviously, I did not deliver, but I was kept the second time overnight to monitor blood pressure. They had put me on I believe a blood pressure medication at that time. And I still monitored at home my blood pressures. I also, the last time that I had spoke with my OB, I can't remember the date, it was at the very end of July, or excuse me, the very end of June, that I met with my OB for the last time before I delivered. I explained to her, I even asked her for a C-section because I was very worried about the placenta being so close. And she brushed it off saying, I think we'll be fine. I've delivered other babies in the same situation, and you'll be okay. So it kind of put me a little bit at ease, but I still had that feeling in my head. And so the third time that I went in for triage, I was admitted. My protein levels were, and everything was, they admitted me for preeclampsia at that time due to the protein in my urine, my high blood pressures, and then the pitting edema, the swelling that I had in my feet, my hands, and in my face as well. And so they induced me for birth. I was 36 weeks and 3 days, I believe, pregnant. They had induced me at that time. It didn't want to take, my body was not ready to go into labor, so it took a while for several attempts of different types of induction medication to be able to start labor at that point. So, let me see where I'm at. Okay, so when my water finally broke on the 6th, so I went in the night of July 4th, and very late, like 11 o'clock at night. This was the third time, mind you, that I had decided to go to triage. So I thought they would just kind of do the same thing. They would monitor me, send me home again. So Cole had work the next day because that was a Sunday, and he was tired, and I said, just stay home. I'll just go. And that's just kind of me. I've always been pretty independent. I've done a lot of things on my own. I've already had 2 kids, so I'm like, I got this. Go ahead, stay home, go to bed. I'll call you. I'll let you know what's going on. And then on, late into the morning hours, I was admitted for the preeclampsia. So I ended up calling him. He did end up coming up. But of course, the one time I told him to stay home, that's when I needed to. But it was pretty uneventful for the whole day of the 5th. Just kind of a whole lot of lying around. I was frustrated because I wasn't progressing, all that stuff. I was just huge and felt like a whale, and I was just ready to have a baby. So I was just kind of over it at that point. And so on the 6th, my water finally broke. And then that's kind of when everything just really started going fast. I went from 6 centimeters dilated to a 10 within 15 minutes. So, and mind you, yes, I planned on getting an epidural. I had not had an epidural with my other 2. My first one, I was 19 years old. My mother was a retired nurse and said, you need to be able to feel when you have contractions and be able to know that push. And so I pushed out a 9-pound, 4-ounce baby with no pain medication, which was Gavin right here. So, yeah, he was a big guy. But, so yes, I knew what it felt like at that point. Ava, it was too fast to be able to get the epidural because I had planned, yep, I'm getting one this next time. I knew what it felt like, I'm getting one. Didn't have time, it went too fast. With Jovi, I wasn't feeling anything, and I said, I don't want to, waste their time. I'm not even feeling pain yet, so I don't need one right now. And so I just kind of waited. I shouldn't have waited. But once my water broke, then the pain really started coming on. I was 6 centimeters, and I said, I want it now. I remember grabbing Cole. I don't remember exactly what I said. I tell them to give me the medication. Put something in my arm. Do something. And so, at that point they had called for the epidural, but things just happened so fast I wasn't able to. I will say that that was the worst pain I've ever experienced in my life, going from a 6 to a 10 centimeters within 15 minutes. I really thought I was going to die at that point, just based off of pain. And come to find out later on, it wasn't just a typical labor pain, delivery pain. There was more going on inside my body. And so it makes sense now why it was so painful. And so when I had Jovi, they barely had the glove on, came in. Okay, she came out because I said, I got to push now, and she came out. And that was it. At that point, the doctor, my OB was not there. The on-call doctor was Dr. Ma. And Dr. Ma is an angel. He is amazing. I had not met this man prior to this, but he was an amazing guy, and I'll kind of go through that during my story. But he got Jovi, barely had his glove on, and he said, what did he say, Cole?
Oh wow, that was a lot of blood.
Oh wow, that was a lot of blood. And typically, doctors don't really say that when you have a baby. Especially even if they're thinking that they're not going to say it. So for him to say that, it was Cole kind of was like, okay, what does that mean, kind of thing. I was kind of out of it, and this whole time during this is very fuzzy for me as far as memory. So a lot of this is based off of what Cole family has told me. So correct me if I say something wrong. But I'm pretty sure I have the story down now. I've told it many times. But at that time, they had put Jovi on my chest. It was in a couple minutes. They were trying to press on my stomach to release the placenta. It was very painful. I don't know if any other moms here have had that happen. It's very painful for them to press on your stomach after delivery to remove the placenta. And I remember that being very painful. Cole said my lips were turning blue at that point, and because I had lost a lot of blood. When they were removing the placenta, the cord detached from the placenta, and pieces were just coming out. They were shredding they were trying to get it to come out. At that point, I think I had gotten sick as well. I had thrown up, and I was going to throw up, and I said, somebody take the baby. This was all within, I think, 3 to 5 minutes of time, maybe 10 minutes from birth until this point in time. I said I was going to throw up, so I said, take her off of me. And then at that point, doctor decided that we need to put her under anesthesia so that we can go in manually and remove the placenta because they weren't able to remove it while I was still awake. So they told Cole, go with baby, do baby things, fill out whatever the paperwork, and you can take pictures, watch her, whatnot. And they said, we're just going to put her in surgery, remove that placenta, and then back into postpartum room. So during the time when I was having the placenta removed, I had also lost a little bit more blood. They had given me blood, packed red blood cells at that point, I think 2 units, because I had lost some blood at that point. They removed the placenta manually, and then doctor had left. So once doctor was done, Dr. Ma had left, he had gone home. He was done with his shift and everything. He had gone home. The anesthesiologist, as they were, waking me up, taking me off the sedation and all that, can't think of the word. Anesthesia. Anesthesia. My blood pressure and my pulse, my heart rate were very, they just weren't stable. I want to say blood pressure was low and pulse was high, if that makes sense. Versus anybody, okay. And so at that point, the anesthesiologist called Dr. Ma and said, hey, this isn't really where we want it to be. And at that point, they discussed and they decided for me to be monitored in ICU. So they had told Cole at that point, we're just gonna send her there, we're gonna monitor for the rest of the night, just kind of make sure things are okay, she's stable. At that point, I wasn't having any bleeding, not more than what you normally would have at that point. And so I was taken to ICU. Cole was still dealing with Jovi and doing her things. And then I got to ICU, it was around, what, midnight?
11:45.
Okay, 11:45, who remembers? And so at that point, oh my goodness, Courtney, I just noticed you, sorry. So at that point, they were monitoring me. They said that I was joking with the nurses, talking in ICU, talking about how, asking about the baby, worried that Cole, this was a huge thing, and this was like, now I look back and it was kind of silly, but at the time I was very worried. My mom can attest to this, that Cole had never dealt with a newborn before. And so I was joking with the nurses, like, Cole can't be left with this baby. Like, somebody needs to go, like, who's in there? He needs to, like, have some teaching here.
In my defense, I had to ask which way to put the diaper on.
Okay. Case in point, right there. But no, he did fine, but just like any new parent. But, you know, I had 2 children prior, and so I'm like, this is, like, he's not going to be able to handle this on his own. Like, he needs to have somebody. So I was really worried. I was joking with them about that. I think I was there, what, maybe half an hour in ICU? Not even half an hour. They were checking me in, checking my vitals, doing all the things that they do when they bring a new patient into the ICU. The nurse at the time, her name was Gabby. And just a side note, I did meet, and I know some of you I'm friends with on Facebook, but not last year, was it the year before?
2 years ago.
And 2 years ago, I had gone back to the hospital with Cole and Jovi and my family to kind of do a thank you to the nurses, doctors, any people that helped me and Jovi during this time of my trauma. And so I had met several of the nurses that I didn't remember personally, but had a huge part in my care, saving my life, making important decisions. So at the time, so going back, so this is how I know this information, because I had spoken with these nurses. So I spoke with Gabby during that time when we met. I went back to the hospital and met them. She was one of my ICU nurses. She was in there doing my intake at the time, and there was one other gal as well. I can't remember her name. So they were kind of like a team together at the time. And so when I was in ICU, I was joking around. Gabby had said there's way that patients act before something major is going to happen. They call it impending doom. And basically, I was very fidgety. I was saying I didn't feel right. Something was wrong. Couldn't sit still. Just very agitated, and couldn't specify exactly what. At that point, I had gone unresponsive. So I was in the ICU for less than 30 minutes. She was in the room, thankfully. That was another God thing, that I had somebody in the room with me when that happened. I think that has a lot to do with how I came out of all of this, because compressions were started immediately, care was started immediately at that point. Excuse me, I need a drink. Okay, sorry, is that on again? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So at that point I had my first code, and that was it was around 12:30, a little after 12, somewhere in there I had my first code blue. And that is announced, I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with hospital settings, when somebody has a code blue, it is announced throughout the hospital over the loudspeaker, so that people, everybody, whoever is available, can run to that room and assist and kind of figure out what's going on. So I can't remember, were you on your way back?
I was in the waiting room at that point.
He was in the waiting room at ICU at that point.
Yeah, you went on, or I had gotten I had come up to see you right as you went unresponsive.
Okay, so he was coming up right as, and you heard the code, correct?
No, the code didn't happen for about 45 minutes after.
Okay.
You went unresponsive.
Oh, so they came and told you that I went unresponsive?
I was on my way up there. I walked into the ICU as you were going unresponsive.
Okay. And then he heard the code blue, and they say what room number it is. And you knew what room I was in, correct?
At this point, your parents were there.
Okay, because I had gone unresponsive. All right, so I had gone unresponsive at that point. Cole had called my parents. I think you called your parents as well. This is Rick and Sue Munge. This is my in-laws, if you want to raise your hand. Those are Cole's parents. So he had called his parents, my parents at that point that I was unresponsive, to come up to the hospital. And when the code blue went off, did you know my room number?
Yes.
Okay, so at that point, then it was like, okay, what's going on? You know, you can imagine sitting in the waiting room, hearing the room number of your wife or your daughter-in-law, whoever, go off, and then it's like, okay, what now? Because it's not like somebody comes in immediately and tells you what's going on. So there was a lot of worry happening at that point on their end. Within the next few hours, I think Cole even said between roughly around 12:30 and 3:30, I had a total of 5 cardiac arrests. And so 5 codes at that point. So that basically had happened when I had gone unresponsive. They didn't know at that point what was going on. And I think they knew that they had to go in and do emergency surgery to explore and see what's going on, because I really didn't have a lot of blood coming out of me at that point visibly. So they knew there must have been something inside of me. I was bleeding internally somehow. So they decided to take me to OR. There was not an OR room available at that point. So they, I believe, placed a Bacri ball. Corey, is that correct? Bacri ball?
Bacri balloon.
Bacri balloon, okay. And that basically is for when you hemorrhage. They will put that in the uterus to be able to collect blood that is hemorrhaging, to be able to stop the hemorrhage. They, in the notes, and Dr. Munge told me afterwards, once they placed this balloon, it had filled pretty much immediately. And that's a red flag right there. It does not fill immediately, typically. And when I don't know if it was when they were taking it out or placing it, but it had tore part of my uterus as well. So during the surgery, they'd taken me in, placed this balloon in, it had tore part of my uterus. And at that point, they knew they had to remove the uterus, so I had a partial hysterectomy at that point. So I'm in the OR, having this emergency surgery. While I was having the surgery, I was having cardiac arrest. There was somebody on top of me doing compressions at all times. So there was the nurses told me there was a line of nurses out in the room to be able to switch, to come on top of me, someone to do the air, someone to do the compressions while they were doing surgery. Which I can't imagine trying to do surgery while somebody is jiggling your body, trying to save your life. So, you know, the surgeons were amazing. And so they did a partial hysterectomy at that point. They had originally thought that I had an amniotic fluid embolism. And that was later ruled out. And sorry to call on you again, Corey. Could you explain what an amniotic fluid embolism is?
It's when amniotic fluid comes out of the uterus and gets into your bloodstream.
And
It's usually a fatal outcome.
yes, a fatal outcome. Most mothers do not survive this. There's many cases where it happens prior to giving birth, while you're still pregnant, when you're in labor. You know, there's other stories of women who have this happen. You go into cardiac arrest, and they have to run you to an emergency C-section to be able to remove the baby, to save the baby. So typically, this is not something where you walk away from. So that's what they thought that I had originally. It was later ruled out just based off of the timeline and exclusion of diagnoses. And it was later ruled that I went into DIC. I cannot think of the correct term. Corey again. DIC, what does that stand for?
Disseminated.
Disseminated intravascular.
Doctor, I forgot that you were I'm looking at Corey the whole time. She was one of the nurses that works, sorry, what floor are you on?
I'm on postpartum.
Postpartum. So she was dealing with Jovi. She dealt with us a lot during my time. Thank you, Dr. Lovell. I forgot that you were here. I should have been listening to you the whole time. So, okay, say that again.
Disseminated intravascular coagulation.
Okay, so that has to do with how your blood clots. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that I was told, that kind of in layman's terms, what happens is that your blood only has so many clotting factors. Once those clotting factors run out, you just continually bleed. So, if you cut your arm, the clotting starts to happen. In my case, I was hemorrhaging a lot and went into this DIC where it stopped clotting. So I basically was just bleeding out. And is it correct that kind of your veins kind of dilate and open, or how exactly? I'm trying to explain how this works.
It's just continued hemorrhage, so.
Continued hemorrhaging. Okay, great way to put it. And so I was having this happen while I was having the surgery, and they could not control the bleeding. And so they were putting blood in me as fast as it was coming out. Doctors and nurses had told me that at that point, they had to afterwards change their scrubs, change their shoes, because there was so much blood coming out on the floor all around that there was just no way to control it. And so I had total, I can't remember the exact number, but I had enough blood come into me that was transfused into me to fill 5 grown men. So for that amount of blood to be able to go in and out kind of gives you an idea of how fast, I was hemorrhaging and why I was having so many cardiac arrests. Because the heart was just not keeping up with it. The nurses were amazing in being able to do compressions, and that's why I mentally am how I am today. If those compressions would have not been done the way that they are, if they would have not been started immediately like they were, it would have been a different outcome as far as the oxygen getting to my brain and how my brain functions. So another God moment right there. And so once they had removed, they did a partial hysterectomy. They left one ovary so I would not be in menopause at the age of 36. So thank goodness for that at the time. And so in order to kind of stop this continual hemorrhaging, they had to pack me with material, sponges, and then you leave it open so that they could go back in later, take those out, clean it, debride it, put more in. So I was packed, kind of like stuffed like a turkey, and then wrapped with kind of like saran wrap or something. It's not, obviously it's not saran wrap, but just to kind of give you a visual, I was kind of left open with packing in my abdomen. And and at that point I was intubated in ICU. I had my heart function, was it 20%?
Like 30 or so.
I think it was 20%. I think my cardiac, my output was, my function was 20%, my heart was. Huh?
Your lung function was down.
Yes, my lung function was very low. My heart was at 20% function. I think I had acute kidney failure, a lot of a slew of other things that my organs, just due to the bleeding and cardiac arrest. And so I was intubated at that point, and the doctors, and I can't remember what day, was this the next day that they...
The very next morning.
The very next
6
morning,
hours after.
the doctors came in, Cole was there and my brother was there, and they discussed with him kind of what their plan was. They had a plan, but it wasn't like, okay, this is gonna work kind of thing. Because at that point, it was looking pretty grim. They weren't really sure if I was going to survive at that point. They wanted to originally put me on an ECMO machine and explain a bypass. Okay, so, and that kind of like, makes your heart function so that other parts of your body can heal, that it can help the blood kind of circulate like it's supposed to so that my organs can heal. I was not able to be put on ECMO because I was on medicine to make my blood clot. So typically you have to be on blood thinners to be able to be on ECMO. So I was on clotting medication at that point. So that definitely was not an option for me to be able to be on this machine. So the other option that they had come up with was that they were going to turn me on my stomach and turn me prone position. So they had said that they kind of learned this technique from patients that have COVID, because this was 2021. COVID precautions were still in place, a little bit more lax at that point, but still in place. And they had learned a lot from turning COVID patients on their stomach so their lungs and their heart can heal better. So they said, we're going to try this and see if it works, kind of thing. And at that point, I think you said that you had called the family to kind of come up. My brothers, my sisters were there, and I'm not sure exactly what they said to you guys, but basically like...
They had us all go in
yes,
all at the same time.
They wanted you to go in there, not to say goodbye, but hey.
We prayed.
Yes, prayed, definitely prayed over me. To kind of... We're not sure if this is going to work. So family come in, say prayers, do whatever you need to do before we turn her. So this was kind of a touchy time for family. And obviously I don't remember, but I know it was a very hard time for my family to be able to have to go in there and do that. So I know they said a lot of prayers. I know before this they had reached out to other family. Those family members reached out to other family members. Those family members reached out to their churches. I don't know how far the prayer chain went, but it went a long way. And I love to tell the story about my grandmother, my mom's mom. When all this had happened, did you call her?
I called my sister Cindy.
Okay.
I could barely talk.
Yes.
Help me. It's horrible.
Yeah.
I said, call everybody.
Call everybody.
I said, you call everybody. So she did.
She called my
She called
grandmother, and she was, 92 at the time, I believe? And you would never guess she's 92. She, still lives in her big house, drives her car to the grocery store, is involved in church. And so she called, my Aunt Cindy had called her, told her, this was at, 2, 3 in the morning? Something like that. Called her, she actually answered the phone, which is surprising. And my cousin was with her at home at the time. I had spoken with him. She woke up, my grandmother woke up my cousin Danny. He was in the other room and said, we got to pray for Becky. She woke him up. I want to say he said that he kneeled on the ground. My grandma, I don't know if my grandmother kneeled on the ground, but they were in surrender. They said, God, we need a miracle, we need something. And it just blows my mind that my 92-year-old grandmother woke up. They were able to pray together. And my cousin had told me at the time, he said, I spoke with him this last summer, and he said, I have only felt the Holy Spirit around me and that feeling of God close to that closeness once before. And it's a feeling you can't describe, but you know that God is there. And he said he felt that. He felt the presence of God as he was praying with my grandmother. So that alone was a miracle just for, my grandmother to wake up and then to be able to pray for me. And so that's really special in my story as well. And so back to the hospital ICU, they had family come in. At that point, they decided to try to turn me. So they kind of just went slowly, and they turned. It's on a table, correct?
No, they did it on the gurney.
on the gurney?
Or the bed, whatever you were laying.
The bed, but it doesn't, the bed turn?
No,
Okay,
they
so.
had to manually
Okay.
pick you up and.
Okay, so they started to turn me, and very slowly, it wasn't like they just plopped me over. But I was also still stuffed, like turkey. And so they slowly started to do that, and at that point, vitals kind of were improving a little bit. So they fully were able to flip me over on my stomach. I have some photos, and you are all welcome to come up here and look, because I know you can't probably see it right now. But there are several photos of me. Over here, I'm on my stomach, and up here, I'm on my stomach as well. And these are pictures of Jovi next to me. After the successful turning happened, somewhere in that timeline, my sister Amy and my brother Brad were discussing. Amy had the idea that we need to bring Jovi up to do skin to skin. And that was a huge turning point, I feel like, in Jovi's care and in my care. Cole had told me that even before she came up and after, when they were discussing, when you talked about Jovi when I was intubated, talking about Jovi and how she was doing, whatever, she needs her mommy kind of thing, that was it my brain activity? My brain activity would start spiking. So I was in there still, and I knew that they were talking about Jovi, and that was, a big concern at the time, about how she was doing. During that time, Jovi was just kind of hanging out, chilling with the nurses at the nurses station, because a lot of family was dealing with me and my situation, and so the nurses said, "Oh, take care of her, we're going to feed her," all that. And I'm not sure what day it happened, but she was ended up being admitted to the NICU at that time. She was losing weight, she wasn't feeding well, she wasn't eating very well. And so she was losing a lot of weight. She was 5 pounds, 14 ounces when she was born. So she wasn't teeny tiny, but she was premature. And so they decided to admit her to NICU. They placed an NG tube to be able to supplement her with formula that she wasn't able to get from eating. And so it ended up being a godsend that she was in NICU. And that was another God moment that at the time, it was like, oh my gosh, my wife is intubated in ICU. My daughter is intubated. Her baby is now being admitted to NICU. So you're kind of torn between these two spots of, I got to check on baby, need to check on wife. Obviously, I was more important. I was a little bit more unstable. Jovi, everything else was fine. She just wasn't eating. And we knew she was being taken care of very well in the NICU. And so, like I said, it ended up being a godsend that she was there because it was COVID precautions. At that time, no children under the age of, I don't know, no children, were allowed to be in the hospital at that point to come visit. So it allowed my family, my immediate family and friends, to be able to be there for me, take care of things for myself without worrying about who's going to watch Jody, who's going to take care of her, and all that, because she was being taken care of at the hospital as well. She was discharged the day before I was. So, during that time, I was really worried about her, and I don't want her to be here. But now that I look back, it was really, God put that in place so that I would be able to see her as well, so that I could have that time to bond with her, because they facilitated for her to be able to come up to the NICU. So, like I was saying, my sister had the idea to do skin to skin. My brother brought it up to Cole. We were just talking about this last night, that my brother kind of came up to Cole and was like, hey, Amy's got this crazy idea, Amy has these crazy ideas that, to do skin to skin with Jovi. And Cole, I think, did you talk with the doctor? He said, that's a great idea. That's not a crazy idea. That's a great idea. So he spoke to whoever the doctors, nurses, and they, and this wonderful person over here, Corey, was a huge part of facilitating Joey to come up and be able to see me, to do that skin to skin with me. And so those pictures depict that as well. This one is me while I was intubated with Joey on me, and she has her eyes open, looking directly at me like she knew that I was her mom. And so that was amazing that that was able to happen. I was intubated, I believe, 4 days. Is that correct? 4 days?
4 days.
Something like that. And my next memory after the tube was taken out, they were taking me off of sedation, paralytics, because they had, my vitals had been improving, everything, I was still in a pretty critical state, but everything was improving enough for me to be able to be extubated. And so, my first memory coming out, I think my brother and my sister were in the room. I did not know that I was in ICU. I didn't know what happened. My last memory was them putting a mask on me to put me under to take my placenta out. So I assumed I was in postpartum. And I just thought, wow, my family came to see the baby. Like, I mean, my parents, at that time, was she your 11th grandchild? Is that correct? We have a lot. There's a lot of grandkids. So I believe she was the 11th grandchild. You know, when the first two are born, Gavin and Ava, I think, and then my sister Kathy had her son Andrew, they came to see them in the hospital because it was a big deal. They were the first ones, you know. By the 11th one, it's kind of like, oh great, you had a baby. Okay, we'll see you in summer. We'll see you at Christmas or whatever. And so I was like, wow, this is great. You know, my family came to see Jovi. And so I thought I was still in postpartum. It didn't register to me, and I was on a lot of medication at the time, which there are some pretty funny stories of my hallucinations. And so, sorry, I just lost track. You distracted?
Sorry.
And so I didn't realize I was. The moment I realized something had happened is when they were doing a nurse shift change. When you're in the hospital, the nurses in front of you or like in the room, they kind of give a summary. Okay, this is patient so-and-so. They had this. This is what we did last, da-da-da. So they kind of give the rundown of what's going on. All I heard during the nurses talking was, this is patient so-and-so, partial hysterectomy. And I was like, okay. So I asked Cole what happened. He was not in the state to be able to tell me what happened.
Also medically didn't know.
Medically, there's a lot happening. So Dr. Ma ended up coming in later that day, I believe, and explaining everything. And it didn't really fully hit me. You know, you don't understand fully what happened at that point. And he basically, you know, after I was in ICU, I was transferred to a different floor. During that time, I was able to go see Jovi several times. I attempted to try to breastfeed her. That was a huge thing that I really wanted to be able to breastfeed. And I really tried, and just during trauma and all that, it just did not happen. But it was a very important thing to me. And so we were able, it was amazing to be able to do that with her again, since she was in the hospital. If she was not in the hospital, I would not have been able to do any of that with her to be able to try to bond. But I do remember the very first time when I was awake and saw her. I remember them giving them to her to me, and this is pictures of me feeding her and holding her for the first time. But I remember I didn't recognize her. I didn't know if that was my child, and that's probably one of the biggest things that I struggle with, and that is hard for me is. The bond that I had with Jovi, that, you know, I really worried that she wasn't going to know me. And obviously it turned out fine. She, I think, is a mommy's girl. But, you know, at the time, it was hard. It was like, you know, I didn't know this was my child because I really didn't get to see her when I gave birth. And so just the disconnect, it took a while for me to really put it all together and feel like she was my child. So anyways, everything kept improving. At the time, when I was on one of the other floors, and this has to do with my infection in my arms, I had some pain in my abdomen. They did an ultrasound. They said, okay, we think this is an abscess or something. We're going to go in and remove it. And I had it set up to have it removed laparoscopically. And the next day, you know, they had me on antibiotics at the time. The next day, when I was supposed to have it happen, they, you know, I think they did another sonogram. They asked me about, you know, pain was going down. They said, I don't think we need to go in. I think it's, you know, going down. I think the medication's working. So we're not going to go in. We're not going to worry about it. Later on, that had a big part in why they believed that I had the arm infection. So when I was discharged from the hospital, which these pictures right here, this is my last day. This is my doctor, Dr. Suhendra, who was amazing. He's a multi-specialty doctor. So he helped run part of the ICU, and then he also is an infectious disease doctor, which
You need it.
I needed, didn't know it at the time, didn't know he was that at the time. But he was wonderful. He looks like the 20-year-old tech in the background, but he is an amazing doctor. He just looked very young. And then these are when I pulled into the driveway, when I came home, and this is the first picture of me holding Joey when I came home. And so at that point, I'm just like, I'm ready to heal. I'm ready to move on. And I didn't even want to talk about it. I was just very opposite of how I am now. I don't want to discuss it. I don't want to know what's going on. And I wanted to move on with my life. At the time, during the whole hospital stay, my right arm, I could not move it. So Ava even helped me like brush my teeth. People had to help feed me. My right arm, I have dominant right arm, so either left hand was very weak as well. But right arm was not moving at all, not able to move it. I did start slowly being able to move it some, but I don't think I could even lift it off my leg, maybe not even a half a foot, maybe 6 inches, a foot maybe. And so that was a big concern going forward. As I was healing, I had like 5 specialty doctors. I had a hematologist, I had a cardiologist, the OB, just the basic practice doctor. There was a lot of doctor appointments happening at that time. And I remember expressing my arm, saying I'm having this pain in my arm. And during my hospital stay, I had 2 subclavian DVT and then a superficial clot in my right arm. So they attributed my pain to this clot that I had. And they said, as it goes down, I was on medication. As it goes down, it should improve. And as I'm going to these doctor appointments, you know, they're just saying it'll be fine, reassured. They didn't do an x-ray, they didn't do anything like that until I saw my OB, Dr. Moss, which is why I said he is just an angel, because he was the one that referred me to orthopedics. He said, that's not right. For an OB to say that, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, definitely need a referral. And I was glad somebody was taking me seriously. When I went to orthopedics, they did the x-ray. They saw, the doctor said, well, we see just a little defect in the bone here, but it could be a number of things. So let's do an MRI. So did the MRI. I think they called me the next day. And they said, you know, roundabout way, you have bone infection and you need to have surgery in 2 days. So it was like, okay, wow. So at that point you're just kind of in shock. You don't know what to say or do. It's just like, okay, let's do this. You know, I was really scared. I did not want to go back to the hospital because of everything that had happened. Just a lot of trauma. So I had my first surgery October of 21 on my right arm. They cleaned out my bone. They gave me a PICC line, which I have pictures of that. I have an x-ray of, I think this is my original x-ray. I can't remember. It shows the humerus bone of where the infection was eating the bone. And I had my first surgery on my right arm in 21. I thought, okay, it's gone. Got the antibiotics. I had a PICC line for 6 weeks, giving me the IV antibiotics that I did every day on my own. I had a home health nurse come in. We had physical therapy, we had occupational therapy. So a lot of people coming in and out. And once I was done with that, I'm like, okay, I can move on. I can recover. Come December of that year, severe pain in my right side. And when Cole took me to the ER, turns out that, and I thought I was like bleeding internally, the sutures came up and something happened, you know. And they did an ultrasound, and it turned out that I had my one remaining ovary had flipped on itself 3 times, and it was putting on circulation and dying. So I had emergency surgery at that point to remove my remaining ovary. So then after that one, I was taking care of Jovi on my own for a few months the next year, January, February. March came, my left arm was kind of starting to hurt. I had talked to doctors about it, and they said, well, it's probably because you're taking care of Jovi. Everything's on your left side because you're not using your right very much. So left side was hurting, just attributing it to taking care of her. When I went and saw my orthopedic doctor for a checkup on my right arm, I expressed this concern on my left arm. He said, well, typically the bone infection, it stays like in that bone or that side, so it's probably not that. And I said, can we just do an x-ray? I had this feeling, you know, and I said, let's just do an x-ray. I'm here, it's not gonna hurt anything. So he finally decided to give me an x-ray, and believe it or not, there was some discrepancy on that x-ray as well. We did the MRI, same situation, had to have surgery on my left arm. I had infection in my bone. I had that surgery around, March, April, somewhere in there on my left side. And from that point on, all my surgeries happened kind of every few months because pain was still there. I had a PICC line with my, after my surgeries for 6 weeks with every single surgery. And so it just kept snowballing, surgery after surgery every few months. I had one, I was hospitalized, June of 22 for another surgery on my right arm. The next month, I had an allergic reaction to the medication that they were giving me because they changed my medication because it wasn't killing the infection. And so they put me on a new one. I had had a really bad allergic reaction. I was throwing up violently, dry heaving, very sick, high fever. I think I had a rash. There's a picture of my hand. I had this rash like all over my body. So we went to the ER for that. They finally admitted me. They didn't want to believe that it was the medication at first because I had been on the medication for at least a week. But it didn't start, reaction didn't start till later on. So they said, it's probably not that, and kept giving me the medication at the hospital. And I said, I think it's the medication because I get sick and start throwing up every time that you give it to me. So they finally figured it out. That it was the medication. I became neutropenic at that point. They had put me, so I was really susceptible to infection. They put me in isolation on the cancer floor because they had the isolation room, which that was the best room in the hospital. I don't know if any of you guys have been in the hospital and the bed awful, but that was the comfiest bed. It was quiet. It was so silent in there. You couldn't hear anybody else's alarms. You couldn't hear anybody else screaming or crying or getting out of their bed because an alarm goes off every time someone gets out of the bed. So you have that all night long. So this was a quiet room. So it was like VIP room. So it was wonderful. I didn't mind being in there. Then come August, I had another surgery on my arm, and then after that surgery, my doctors were like, okay, we are not experienced enough to know exactly why this is not getting rid of your infections. So, because it's rare, a bone infection, osteomyelitis, is very rare to begin with, and the type of bacteria that was in my arms was rare again. And so they referred me up to Mayo Clinic. I had 4 surgeries at Mayo Clinic. The first 2 I had right before Christmas of 22, and I had them done at the same time. So I had both of my arms done at the same time. Because at this point I had so many surgeries, I was just over it. I'm like, let's just do it, get it done with. Because I had some partial replacements first, joint replacements first. put in with antibiotic-infused cement. So that cement with the joint replacements couldn't stay in there forever. But I had to have it done so that it could kill the rest of the bacteria in my bones. And then later on the next year, I had 2 more surgeries to get the full replacement. So I had 4 surgeries at Mayo. I now have 2 full reverse joint replacements on each side. My last surgery was October of last year, so it's been a year out from my last surgery on my arms. I had another surgery after that at Mayo for a meniscus repair because somehow during all my trauma I tore up my meniscus. Don't know how that happens, but I wasn't running marathons or anything, so I had that surgery done February of this last year. But the best guess as to how I got these infections, the doctors have told me, is that basically when I had my trauma, they had to put an intraosseous line in both of my arms. And that's a line that they put into your bone to give blood product during life-saving procedures. So they put these needles directly into my humerus bones, 1 on each side, and it left an opening. Once those were taken out, it left an opening in my bone. Back to that abscess that I had, they said most likely what happened is it either leaked into your bloodstream, the abscess did, or it burst. Somehow it got into your bloodstream and it attached itself, that bacteria attached itself inside my bone. That's how I was able to have it on both sides. And that's why they weren't able to get rid of it right away, because the type of bacteria that was in my arms was a bacteria that was from my gut. And that is kind of unheard of, that you don't see that. And so they didn't know how to treat it properly down here. Mayo doctors said they probably just weren't aggressive enough because they weren't as versed in that type of bacteria in the bone infection. And so all in all, I had 14 surgeries total and within about 2.5 years. And then we're almost done, but I wanted to give one more quick story of a huge God moment that I had while I was being hospitalized for my allergic reaction of my medication. I remember I was in the hospital room. Nobody was there visiting at the time, but I just remember I was so miserable. I had this horrible migraine. I had been throwing up for days, high fever. I just really felt like my body was just like giving out. You're just exhausted and defeated at that point. And in walks this, the phlebotomist, the girl from the lab. This is the same nurse, or not nurse, phlebotomist, that was the only person who could draw my blood during my trauma. When I was hospitalized after my trauma, all my veins kind of had shut down because I was getting blood taken every few hours. My arms were black and blue, and I was begging them just to take blood out of my feet at that point because it was so painful. They would dig around in there for a vein. And so this one lab girl, her name's Jennifer, and I called her at the time, I called her my blood unicorn. I don't know why, it's not a lot of medication, okay? Because she was the only one, I'm like, you're a unicorn, you're the only one that can do it. And so she walks into my room when I feel like I'm just, at my lowest point during that allergic reaction, hospitalization. Walks in, she said, she remembered me. I said, oh, you do? I remember you. And we were talking, and it was wonderful to get to see her again. And she said, I can tell you're not doing good. She said, can I pray for you? And she put her hand on me. I said, absolutely, This makes me emotional because it's just like so powerful, the feeling that I had afterwards. She put her hand on me and she prayed, God, take this pain from her. I don't remember everything that she said, but I remember that she prayed over me. And it was a quick couple-minute prayer. She got her the blood like she was always able to do, and she walked out. Not even 2 minutes after she walked out of that room, I felt like 100% healed. I was up walking around. I was crying. I just felt so overwhelmed with everything that I was couldn't believe how well I was feeling. I was able to eat something. I remember I called my mom, I don't think you answered. So I called my dad, and I'm crying. And I'm like, I think you were like, what's wrong? What's going on? I said, no, you don't understand. Like, I feel better. I'm eating something. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was like, that was the Holy Spirit. At that feeling, like, if you have not experienced it, it's something you can't explain. But I hope that everybody can experience that one day, because it's just totally amazing how it just came into my body and exuded this like joy, and I felt so well afterwards, and I was crying just from happiness that I felt so much better. And so she was a huge part. And I'm going to leave you with this book. One of my nurses from ICU, she was my main nurse that I remember. Her name is Kathy, and she left me with this book when I left ICU. One of these daily devotional books, and it was hers at the time. She didn't buy it separate for me, but she wanted me to have it. And she wrote this message in here and bookmarked July 13th, because July 13th was the day that I was discharged from ICU to go on to a different floor. And feel free to read this passage from July 13th. Because it's just wild how it just pertains to everything at the time. This is the message she wrote. Becky, you may think we helped you, but you helped us too. With COVID the past 1.5 years has been a time filled with much sadness. Being able to help you get better brought us all great joy. July 13th was the day the doctors explained to you what happened. It was the day I read the devotion to you, and I felt it spoke to me about you and your situation. You will have good days and bad, just like the devotion says. You are not stuck, you are just going through. You are moving forward. Please take care and come back to see us sometime with your sweet Jovi Sue. Love, Kathy and your friends in the ICU. And so feel free to read this, and if you have this book at home, read July 13th if you don't get a chance to read it today. But God has really worked in my life. I'm not sure why I'm here, what my purpose is. If my purpose is just to share my story, but I feel like I have 100% become so much closer in my relationship with God through this experience, closer to my family and friends, and maybe that's the only purpose I had, was just to be able to have those better relationships, or to get to know and feel God deeper. So thank you all for listening, and so much for everything.
Oh, is that still going? Do we know?